I discovered that my wife was having a romantic dinner with another man. And it was not by chance, nor by accident, nor by supposition. I saw it with my own eyes. I saw the way she smiled at him, as if she had never smiled at me. I saw her fingers touching the cuff of his shirt, as if she had known him for a lifetime. I saw the two of them toasting what seemed like the end of our marriage, although I didn't know it yet. When I entered the restaurant, I didn't hesitate, I didn't cry, I didn't hesitate. I went straight to the table, turning over plates, glasses, napkins. Both of their eyes widened, as if I were a stranger. But I was the husband. I was the man who had been sleeping next to her for years. I was the man who shared the same roof, the same breakfast, the same bank account. I looked deep into her lover's eyes and said, "I'll talk to you later, I'll sort things out with this traitor." And we went. We went straight to the registry office to sign the divorce documents, like two strangers who had never loved each other. In the weeks that followed, she tried to call me, sent messages, appeared on my doorstep like a shadow of her former self. I cried as if I were a victim, I sobbed as if it was my mistake. He told me that he made a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But what she didn't know, and would only discover too late, is that the man with whom she shared that wine, that look, that hotel, was someone who would destroy her in a way that not even I, with all the pain I felt, would be able to do. Her blow didn't hit me alone. Life prepared a blow for her. And when she found out who he really was, it was too late. And I was already engaged to someone else. For years, I built a solid life alongside her. I fought for us to have stability, love, security. I was the one who remembered the dates, who wrote notes by hand, who tolerated her silence, thinking it was tiredness, not disinterest. How many times did she say she had no appetite, when in fact she had already had dinner with someone else? How many times did you kiss me on the forehead as if it were a favor, while deep down you were already surrendering to another body, another smell, another presence? I thought I knew my wife. But I never really knew him. I never knew what she was capable of. And that was what destroyed me the most. Because betrayal doesn't just hurt your heart, it hurts your memory, your identity, your sense of who you are. I looked in the mirror and I no longer saw a man, I saw an idiot. A clown who trusted, who loved too much, who didn't know how to see the signs. The worst part was reliving every detail of what we built together and realizing that she managed to dismantle everything in a single night. Because it's not the sex that hurts, it's the laughter she shared with him, it's the lightness she exuded, the peace of someone who felt alive with another. With me, she always seemed tired. But with him, she was different. And I realized that at that dinner. At that damn dinner I went into thinking I was going to surprise her with flowers and left destroyed inside. And what hurt the most? It was the coldness. She didn't apologize. She didn't scream. She just followed me to the registry office as if it was inevitable. As if it were part of a plan that had been decided for some time. As if my suffering was an obstacle she was relieved to remove. The pain I carried after that was not that of losing a woman. It was about losing meaning. The floor. The future I imagined. I was already reorganizing my life when she reappeared. Sunken eyes, haggard appearance, makeup smeared by tears that I no longer cared about. He told me that he needed to talk, that he had discovered something that changed everything. And there, with shaking hands, he told me who the man he cheated on me with really was. And at that moment, even without wanting to, I felt sorry. Pity for the woman who was once my love, my partner, my home. It's a shame because now she was alone, betrayed by her own naivety. And, as fate would have it, the person next to me was another woman. A woman who arrived without rushing, without promising anything, but who gave me back what I thought I had lost forever, peace. The curious thing is that while she cried asking for a second chance, I no longer felt angry. I felt distance. An abyss between what we were and what we have become. And in that abyss, she sank. And I went up. That lover, the one who seemed safe, kind, passionate, had revealed his true face. He wasn't just a scoundrel. He was a strategist. Someone who approached her with a clear objective, and when he achieved it, discarded her. But the cruelest detail? He made her sign papers, contracts that she didn't understand, that she thought were just confidentiality agreements. She thought she was protected, but she had given him everything she had. Heritage. Enterprise. Copyright. All. And now she was on the street, without a home, without money, without a husband, without a lover. Tried to come back, of course. He tried to retrace his steps, rewind his life. But certain tapes, when rewound, are already too scratched to work. And I finally understood that certain betrayals don't happen to destroy us, but to free us. The love I thought I felt for her was a prison. I fed her every day with care, presence, loyalty. And she, inside, had already broken the bars and fled. I just didn't know. Now, with another woman, another look, another rhythm, I realize how blind I was. How much love, when it is poorly reciprocated, turns us into slaves of an illusion. But there is something she will never know. Something that has been buried since the day I signed the divorce. A choice I made even before she discovered her lover's scam. Something that, if revealed, would change the entire perception of what really happened. And maybe, just maybe, it would reveal that the real twist was never hers. Now tell me, who really betrayed who? Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not romanticize and we never support any form of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fiction based on real situations, created to clearly show how infidelity destroys lives, families, and trust. The objective is one, to open the eyes of those who listen and show that the truth always comes out, and it comes at a high price. Get ready. You're about to hear a shocking story, full of twists, deep emotions and an ending that will leave you speechless. Good story. His name was Daniel. A 38-year-old man, with a firm gaze, the posture of someone who has faced the world more times than he would like, but who still carries an almost childish kindness between the lines of his face. He worked as a corporate security consultant, dealing with numbers, reports, diagnoses and strategies, but behind all the rationality there was an extremely emotional heart. He was a man of rituals. He liked black coffee at 6 in the morning, leaving notes on the table with simple phrases like, "Good morning, love," and planning birthday dinners at least a month in advance. Life for him was not made of great acts, but of small consistent actions that, in the end, formed something bigger. He believed this, that love was a daily construction, a sum of efforts. This was how he remained present, even when he was absent. Even on days when I spent more time outside than inside. The wife, Laura, was a woman of 35. A literature teacher at a private school, she had a light presence, a delicate smile and a look that knew how to listen. She had the rare ability to make herself unforgettable without much effort. He used words carefully, like someone measuring each sentence before delivering it to the world. What most attracted attention about her, however, was not her obvious beauty, but the serenity she conveyed. There was a peace about her that made others want to stick around. They got married after 3 years of dating, in a small ceremony, surrounded by only their closest friends. It was not a wedding of ostentation, but of presence. Of real vows. Holding hands tightly, as if you know the journey will be long. They built a house together in a quiet neighborhood. Every corner of that home seemed to have been touched by the two of them. The kitchen was the heart of the house, with warm-toned walls and a solid wood table that Laura made sure to keep polished. There the most sincere conversations, the most intense discussions and the deepest silences took place. Their room had light curtains and cotton sheets, hand-picked by her, who always said that the touch of the bed influenced dreams. Daniel's office was in the back, where he isolated himself to work and reflect. It was also there where he wrote letters to Laura on their wedding anniversaries, a habit that she kept stored in a box, along with old notes, movie tickets and other small souvenirs that she collected with care. They had no children. They had tried for a while, but after some exams and failed attempts, they decided that life together was still worth it. They transformed the absence of children into the presence of each other. They traveled. They cooked together. They were reading on the couch. They made plans to grow old alongside each other, complete with a house in the mountains and afternoons of tea watching old films. In the eyes of others, they were a model couple. They were the type of union that many used as a reference. And there was, in fact, something special between them. A kind of loyalty that was not declared, but felt. Laura has always been more introspective. She loved teaching, but she also loved silence. She had a habit of reading before bed and writing in diaries that she never showed to anyone. Daniel respected that. He respected her space, her need to retreat from time to time. He was never one to demand too much attention, and perhaps this caused certain distances to go unnoticed. They were fine, but they weren't as close as they were in the beginning. The routine, the demands of work, social commitments, all of this began to shape a life that was more shared than divided. There was still love, there was still respect, but something subtle had changed. That flame of surprise, of the unknown, seemed to have gradually gone out, giving way to comfortable, but somewhat tepid, predictability. Daniel noticed this, but thought it was normal. Over time, every relationship changes. And he believed that the important thing was to continue choosing the same person every day, even when your heart no longer raced like it used to. Laura, on the other hand, hid a silent conflict in her chest. I missed something, but I couldn't name it. Sometimes, as she looked at her husband sitting on the sofa, she felt a strange longing. As if you were far away even though you were close. As if he was looking for something that was once there, but now seemed to have disappeared. You never mentioned it to him. Not because of a lack of trust, but because I don't want to hurt him. And maybe also because I didn't want to face what it meant. Despite the emotional distance that was subtly established, there were still moments that united them. Dinners on the weekends, the series they watched together, walks in the park on Sunday mornings. Small gestures still happened. Daniel kept leaving notes. Laura still waited for him with hot coffee when he arrived late. But the intensity of these gestures was no longer the same. They became mechanical, almost automatic. And yet, to anyone looking from the outside, they were perfect. There were no fights. There was no screaming. There was cordiality, affection, and harmonious coexistence. But there was no fire. Over time, Daniel became more immersed in his work. He took on new projects, traveled more than before, and began to dedicate himself more intensely to the company's demands. I believed that by doing this, I was also taking care of their future. I wanted to guarantee stability, security, comfort. But, without realizing it, he left empty spaces in Laura's routine. And she, who was never one to ask for attention, began to fill those gaps with other things. Courses. Readings. New friendships. New conversations. Things that initially seemed harmless. The couple's circle of friends has always been small, but in recent months, Laura started interacting more with a group at the school where she worked. People with similar interests, with whom I could talk about literature, theater, art. That made her feel good. Daniel, even when he noticed these approaches, did not feel threatened. I trusted her. Always trusted. He was never the jealous or controlling type. I thought the sparkle in her eyes was beautiful when she talked about a new book or a play she wanted to see. Sometimes he even blamed himself for not being able to keep up with her intellectual pace. But he never allowed it to become a wedge between the two. Time went on. The days passed quickly. And life continued apparently in balance. Laura continued to be attentive in her discreet way. Daniel continued to be present as much as possible. They had plans for the end of the year, a trip to Europe, something they had always wanted to do. They also had a project to open a small bookstore cafeteria, an old dream of Laura's that Daniel was finally starting to make viable. Everything indicated that they were at peace. That even with the adjustments that life demands, they were on the right path. But some nights, Laura took a while to fall asleep. He kept looking at the ceiling, with his fingers intertwined in the sheet, feeling a tightness in his chest that he couldn't explain. There was a restlessness inside her, an anxiety that couldn't be resolved with words. On other mornings, it was Daniel who woke up before sunrise, feeling that something was out of place, but unable to identify what. The house remained silent, the furniture in the same places, the smell of coffee invading the kitchen as always. But something was changing. And still, no one said anything. It was as if they both knew but chose not to look directly at it. As if they were keeping the castle standing, even though they saw cracks in the pillars. Maybe out of fear. Maybe out of love. Maybe because they don't know what to do. And this is where the story really begins. When everything seems too calm. When everything seems too right. When things are organized, but not necessarily alive. It is in this silence that the first signs are hidden. And it is in this silence that the storm begins to form. Their routine seemed to continue as usual. Coffee brewed before the sun rises, a distracted kiss on the way out, quick messages throughout the day with emojis and reminders of common tasks. But there were new subtleties in the atmosphere of the house that no one commented on. The silences between them were no longer comfortable, they became filled with unspoken thoughts, and Laura's eyes lingered longer than necessary when looking out the window during dinner. Daniel felt it, but didn't name it. The body knew before the mind, her touch became colder, her hugs became shorter, and her laughter no longer came naturally. Still, he convinced himself that they were just phases, like all the others they had already overcome. I preferred to believe that. Because admitting otherwise would mean questioning everything they had built, and he wasn't prepared for that. Laura became increasingly involved in the school environment. He began accepting invitations to events, small pedagogical meetings after hours, literary debates in cafes, dinners with colleagues. All seemingly innocent. He justified his absence with solid arguments. It was networking, it was to grow his career, it was important for the new book club project. Daniel, understanding, encouraged her, even if part of him felt like something was slipping through his fingers. He began to notice details. She took longer to get ready, chose new clothes, wore a perfume that he didn't recognize. He said it was a sample he had received, that he was testing something different. And he smiled, agreed, said she looked beautiful, trying to remain present, trying not to allow insecurity to dominate him. The love was still there, he told himself. He was. It had to be. One night, Daniel came home earlier than usual. I wanted to surprise them, prepare dinner, light candles, try to reconnect the two in some way. She went to the market, bought ingredients she liked, red wine, flowers. He entered smiling, with a light heart for the first time in weeks. But he found the house empty. The kitchen is tidy, the silence hangs heavy. He sent a message asking where she was, and the response came with a smiling emoji and the justification that the book club had extended and would return later. He wanted to believe. I really wanted to. But something about that message felt too rehearsed. He decided to wait. He prepared dinner alone, lit the candles, played the music they used to listen to on the first nights of their marriage. But she didn't arrive. The hours passed. The wine was served and not touched. The food got cold. When she finally walked through the door, Daniel's smile had already faded. He asked her if she was okay, if she had fun. Laura responded with a kiss on the cheek and a murmured yes. He went upstairs, took a shower, went to bed early, as if nothing had happened. In the following days, he began to pay more attention to the timetable. In the tones of voice. In the apologies. He started asking more objective questions, and she, in turn, became more evasive. Complicity gave way to a kind of silent game, where both knew something was wrong, but neither wanted to take the first step to destroy that structure. Until Daniel did something he had never done before, he opened her notebook. Not to invade. Not to spy. But on impulse. It was on the table, and he just wanted, for a second, to understand. Feeling like you were crazy or confirming what your heart was already screaming. And it was there that she saw, amid hastily closed tabs and archived messages, his name. Frequent contact, messages exchanged at odd times, typed laughter, compliments, photos that she didn't send to her own husband. Daniel's throat went dry. The stomach turned. For a moment he wished he was mistaken. He wished it was a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. The nature of the conversations, the emojis, the little nicknames, everything spoke for itself. He closed the computer and stood up slowly, as if the floor had lost its grip. He went to the bedroom and saw Laura lying down reading, as calm as if nothing was out of place. She smiled, commented on the book, and he just nodded, feeling a tight knot in his chest, a weight that was pulling him down. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat on the couch until the sun came up, mentally reliving every moment, every detail, trying to find the exact point where he lost the woman he loved. The betrayal, now evident, hurt like a silent blade, cutting inside. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. In the following days, he began to observe more. Not with anger, but with deep sadness. A silent morning. He saw how much she smiled at her cell phone. How alive she seemed when she typed. He saw the clothes carefully chosen for such meetings. He saw the rush to leave, the lightness when he returned. And it all made sense. Each piece of the puzzle fit together with cruel precision. Still, Daniel didn't confront. He needed to understand what that meant. I needed to know if it was an escape, an impulse, or if everything they had lived through had been a lie. He decided to investigate further. He found out the man's name. He found out where he worked. She discovered that he frequented the same cafes as Laura, the same events, the same spaces. He started crossing paths with him casually, just to observe. And what he saw surprised him. He was not an adventurous young man. He was a man with a sober posture, calm voice, apparently respectable. But there was something in his gaze that bothered me. A confidence that seemed like disguised arrogance. Daniel couldn't explain it, but something about that man didn't fit. Something about him caused an uneasiness that went beyond the obvious. Laura didn't know that she had already been discovered. He continued with his subtle theater, believing that gentle gestures were enough to camouflage his emotional absence. She continued kissing Daniel as she left, telling him she loved him, asking him about his day. And he responded, keeping the farce alive on the outside, while inside he was falling apart. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was the breaking of trust, the displacement of love. It was knowing that someone preferred to lie rather than face it. Who chose to divide rather than say that something was missing. The definitive night arrived on a Tuesday. Daniel, after leaving work early, decided to go to the restaurant where, according to his investigation, the two used to meet. It was a discreet, elegant place, far from the couple's usual circuits. He arrived early, asked for a table in a corner, and waited. And he saw it. You saw when she came in. He saw when he smiled when he saw the other. He saw her hug him intimately, when she sat before him like a woman in love. You saw when they toasted. When they touched hands on the table. When they looked at each other as if the world around them didn't exist. And then everything inside Daniel broke. He stood up slowly, crossed the room as if he were walking over rubble, and stopped in front of them. It took the two of them a few seconds to process his presence. Laura turned pale. The other maintained a confident expression. Daniel didn't scream. He didn't make a scene. He just spoke with a calm that cut through more than any scandal. I told the man that I would talk to him later. And he looked at the woman he loved with a pain she would never forget. He said he now needed to resolve things with the traitor. And took her away. They went straight to signing the papers. There was no discussion. There was no crying. Just silence. The same silence that had inhabited the house in recent weeks now filled the car, the registry office, the final moment. Laura tried to say something, but he didn't respond. Just signed. Just delivered. The pain no longer needed words. It was done. And yet, she had no idea what was coming. 3 weeks have passed since the divorce was signed. 3 weeks in which Laura disappeared from the world she knew, immersed in a suffocating mix of shame, regret and a silence that seemed to scream in the empty rooms of a hastily rented apartment. He tried to get back to his routine, but the spaces seemed to shrink. High school was now hostile territory, familiar faces became silent judges, and what was once an intellectual refuge now felt like an emotional prison. She had gambled big, certain that freedom would lead her to a new phase of life, but all she found was a minefield of regrets. The man she had let herself get involved with, the one who made her feel alive again, wanted, heard, seemed to be increasingly distant, as if, having gotten what he wanted, he had lost interest in supporting her. It was on a cloudy morning, while drinking coffee in silence in front of a cell phone screen without notifications, that the first real crack appeared. An email with a corporate title, addressed to her by mistake, caught her attention. It was an exchange of messages between the man and a third person, talking about procedures completed, documents signed without resistance, and properties duly transferred. She read and reread, trying to understand. The legal terms seemed complex to him, but something was wrong. He looked for other messages, retrieved histories, remembered conversations and meetings that had seemed innocent. She began to connect dots, to review papers that she had signed with blind trust, convinced that they were just formal procedures, property reservation contracts, transfer of a supposed partnership in a literary cafe that he had said he wanted to open with her. And then, when he opened the banking app, he felt his stomach turn. His balance, once comfortable, was at zero. Tried to access documents on the shared drive. Nothing. He looked for the man, called, sent messages. No response. In the following days, the lack of return became a certainty. He was gone. With everything. The money she had saved from years of work, part of the sale of royalties from articles and collections she had published, the investment that Daniel had transferred to her account before the divorce as part of the amicable split, everything had been drained. When she looked for a lawyer, she was greeted with a serious look and harsh words. They explained that by signing those documents, she had legally transferred everything. He had given up his assets with authenticated signatures, he had renounced any right to the apartment they lived in, blindly trusting someone who didn't even bother to offer him a decent contract. It was official, she had been deceived. Betrayed by those who claimed to love her. And now, no house, no money, no man. There were consecutive sleepless nights. She spent hours sitting on the living room floor, staring into space, wondering how she had been so naive, so blind. She tried to justify to herself that it was emotional desperation, lack, the desire to feel alive. But no apology lessened the pain. She remembered Daniel, how constant, discreet, present he was. The way he looked at her when she talked about books, the care taken in small things that she now saw as rare. A suffocating regret took hold of his chest. She started writing a letter to him, then deleted it. Called. He didn't answer. She tried to find him at home, but a neighbor informed her that he was temporarily living elsewhere. One day, unable to take the pressure any longer, she decided to go to the office where she knew he used to spend some afternoons. When he saw him from afar, crossing the sidewalk with a calm expression, a woman was walking beside him. Brunette, loose hair, a slight smile on her face. They seemed intimate. They didn't exchange caresses, but there was a synchronicity between the two that made her feel a punch in the stomach. When he noticed her, he stopped. He neither retreated nor advanced. Waited. She walked towards him, each step heavier than the last. Daniel, I need to talk to you, please, it won't take long, he said in a low voice, eyes teary. He took a deep breath, looked at the woman next to him, who nodded understandingly and walked away without saying a word. They entered a nearby cafe and sat down. She didn't know where to start. He waited in silence. There was no anger on his face, just a deep tiredness. "I was tricked," he began, and his voice broke. "The man, the one with whom he robbed me, left me with nothing. Daniel, I lost everything." And the eyes finally overflowed. He watched her carefully, but without surprise. She continued, as if venting was her only chance at finding redemption. "I signed papers he gave me, thinking it was just to formalize a partnership. He said he wanted to open a business with me, that he needed my trust, and I didn't see it. I let myself go. I was stupid. I have nothing left, Daniel. Nothing." He remained silent for a few seconds. He took the napkin in front of him and folded it carefully, as if he needed a small gesture to organize the internal turmoil. Then he spoke. "I know." She looked at him, confused. "You know? Like this?" Daniel then leaned back in the chair and let his gaze become heavy. "I knew before you even signed anything. I knew who he was, what he did. I know this guy. When I saw you at that restaurant, I recognized you immediately. He already tried to do something similar to an acquaintance of mine years ago." "Private investigator?" "No. Just someone who has learned to be suspicious when the pain hits hard. After the divorce, I continued to follow her discreetly. Not out of revenge, but out of intuition. And for knowing you." Laura was in shock. "Did you know? And you didn't warn me? Didn't you try to stop me?" He looked away for a second. "Laura, you betrayed me. You chose to lie to me, to us. If I had tried to warn you, would you have listened? Or would you have thought it was jealousy, control, resentment?" She didn't respond. The tears now came in silence, as if accepting the weight of the truth. "I could have protected you, but it was no longer up to me. I needed to see you fall. Not out of cruelty. But because sometimes, only at rock bottom do we look up with sincerity." She brought her hands to her face, breathing hard. It wasn't anger. It was shame. It was realizing that she had lost not only her husband, but the trust of a man who, despite being betrayed, still cared for her from a distance. The silence between the two prolonged, until Daniel got up, left a note on the table and walked to the door. Before leaving, he looked back. He didn't say he forgave. I didn't say I understood. He just said firmly, but without cruelty, "It was you who lost me, Laura. And there's no going back." And she knew, in that moment, that it didn't matter how much time passed, how many apologies she made, how many tears she shed. She hadn't just lost a man. She had lost herself. Laura remained sitting at the breakfast table for long minutes after Daniel left. The cup of tea in front of her was already cold, but she didn't even notice it. The noise of cutlery, people's footsteps, the soft sound of instrumental music playing in the background, everything seemed muffled, distant, as if the world around him had been immersed in a thick layer of glass. It was a pain without screams, without explosions, the kind that settles in silence and spreads through the intestines until the entire body feels heavy. It was no longer the betrayal that consumed her, nor even the humiliation of having been deceived by someone she trusted. What now tore her apart was something even deeper, the look in Daniel's eyes as he left her. The melancholy firmness of someone who still cared enough to watch his fall from afar, but who had made it clear that he would no longer extend his hands. The next day, she decided to leave the city. Not out of cowardice, but out of survival. He got in the car and drove for hours until he reached a small village where they used to spend some weekends when they were still together. The place was nothing special, cobblestone streets, a simple bakery, houses with well-kept gardens, but it carried memories of lighter times. She rented a small, isolated cottage in a desperate attempt to reclaim some fragment of herself. The nights in that place were cold, and the silence weighed more than the sound. He spent the first few days walking aimlessly, noticing irrelevant details like the rustling of leaves under his feet or the sound of water hitting the rocks of a nearby stream. At night, I wrote compulsively. Not with the intention of publishing or organizing ideas, but as if trying to put what I felt into words was the only way to stay sane. It was on one of those cloudy afternoons, while he was reading an old book under the porch, that he heard the sound of a car approaching. He slowly got up and saw, in the distance, Daniel getting out of the vehicle. I was alone. He brought no suitcases, no flowers, no semblance of reconciliation. She didn't know how to react. She stood still, her hands shaking, holding the book still open. When he got close, he kept his eyes fixed on her for a few seconds before speaking. "I need to show you something," he said in a low voice, without hesitation. Laura didn't understand, but nodded. They entered the cabin, and he took a crumpled envelope from his pocket. He handed it to her without saying anything else. She opened it carefully. Inside were copies of documents, bank transactions, transfer contracts signed by her, all related to the delivery of assets to the man who deceived her. But there was something more, copies of an email exchanged between that man and a third name she didn't recognize. In it, the lover coldly related how he had convinced Laura to sign the papers, and how that move was part of a much larger arrangement, linked to an old revenge process against Daniel. "This man," Daniel began, but his voice trailed off, "he has hated me for years. He was my partner on an old project. We had a disagreement, I reported him for fraud. He lost everything. It disappeared. I never heard back. Until now." Laura looked at the papers as if each line were a blade piercing her skin. The name of the man she thought she knew, who kissed her skin and told her that she deserved more in life, now appeared on a document where he referred to her as a key piece in a plan of personal destruction. She wasn't the goal. It was just a means. A bait. One body used to hit another. His existence, his love, his pain were nothing more than disposable tools in a game of revenge. "He used me, to get to you," he murmured, his voice breaking, as if it were still difficult to believe. Daniel confirmed with a slight movement of his head. There was no triumphalism in his expression, no bitterness. There was just an honest tiredness of someone who was exhausted from living in that spiral of pain. He walked to the window, looked at the gray horizon and said something she hadn't expected to hear. "I didn't come here to humiliate you, or to make you feel worse than you already are. I just wanted you to know the truth. That he understood the depth of the choice he made. Not only for betrayal, but for who you trusted. Who did you give your life for? And let you know, that I was there, even after everything, watching you sink, hoping that you would come back before you hit the bottom. But you didn't come back." Laura sat on the sofa, her legs weak, her body limp. The air seemed thin. He was faced with the weight of everything he had lost. Not just the assets, not just the trust, but the dignity of having been an unconscious accomplice in an attack. He swallowed hard, and after a few seconds, he murmured, "I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel." He turned around, crossed his arms, and finally allowed himself to let the hurt emerge. The voice, although restrained, came out sharp. "But it hurt. Not just me. To you too. And maybe more than you think. You didn't just cheat on one marriage. You betrayed everything you were." The following silence was heavy. Daniel walked towards the door, but before leaving, he turned around one last time. He looked at her with eyes that no longer begged for anything, and said, with a calmness that cannot be faked, "I found someone. Not in the way you think. It wasn't due to lack. It was light. Natural. And she brought me a peace that you could no longer give me. And not because you were bad. But because we were no longer together, even though we lived in the same house. But I didn't need to cheat to find this. And perhaps that is the biggest difference between the two of us." He left. And she didn't try to stop him. Just cried. He cried for the woman he was. For what it has become. And for what could never be again. That night, Laura walked alone along the dirt road to the small viewpoint from which she could see the entire valley below. The cold wind cut her face, but she didn't care. He stayed there for hours, feeling the darkness take over the sky, as if he wanted to be swallowed by it. I didn't want to start over. I didn't know if I could. But at that moment, he understood that he needed to look at himself like never before. Accept what I had done. Understand why you chose what you chose. And begin, even if with her knees in blood, to rebuild herself from the ashes of a love that she herself destroyed. No promises. No expectations. Just with the hope of, one day, returning to being someone who could forgive themselves. The sun was slowly rising as Laura walked down the path back to the chalet, her feet dirty with dirt and her hands cold from the sharp early morning wind. I had spent hours sitting in the gazebo, watching the distant lights go out one by one until all that was left was pitch black. Her body felt heavy, as if every part of her carried the weight of poor choices, unspoken words, ignored warnings. There was no longer anger in his gestures, nor despair. There was a deep silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled, just endured. She entered the house, washed her face with ice water, changed her clothes and spent the entire day in silence, refusing calls, ignoring messages, immersed in a state of emotional paralysis that prevented her from acting, planning, escaping. In the days that followed, the feeling of displacement increased. Everything that once gave him pleasure seemed irrelevant now. The books were still piled on the table, but she didn't touch them. The music no longer rocked her, the walks lost their meaning. I could no longer return to the big city, nor did I remain comfortable where I was. He was between two worlds, one that he had destroyed with his own hands and another that he had no idea how to rebuild. He tried to hold on to what little was left, he wrote down individual sentences in notebooks, wrote letters that he didn't send, made lists of places to visit, people to forgive, aspects of himself that he would like to transform. But everything seemed tenuous, fragile, as if it could fall apart at the slightest whiff of reality. Meanwhile, Daniel reconfigured his routine with an almost cold lucidity. He moved permanently to another apartment, more compact, more functional. He renovated the space with neutral colors, removed any trace of the past from the decor, and filled the shelves with new books, plants and discreet photographs of the woman with whom he now shared his life. There was no rush in that new relationship, no heightened romanticism. It was a serene company, built without euphoria, but with presence. The new partner knew the pain he had experienced, didn't ask for details, but listened when he needed to talk. She respected his silence, understood his limits and, above all, offered him the freedom he had never felt, even within a marriage that seemed safe. The reunion with Laura at the chalet had left its mark on Daniel as well. Although he arrived with a clear purpose, to show the truth, end cycles, he did not emerge unscathed. Seeing the woman he once loved so broken, so torn apart, still moved him in an unexpected way. But not like before. There was no longer any desire to resume, to rebuild their lives together. What remained was pain transformed into distance. It was a memory of a past that would not be repeated. Still, something in him couldn't just turn the page. Sometimes, he found himself remembering old conversations, interrupted projects, smiles that would never return. It was like a scar that, although healed, still throbbed when the weather changed. One day, Daniel received a letter. Handwritten, yellowed paper, firm but clearly emotional letters. It was Laura's. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Nor did he beg for a new chance. It was a raw, honest letter, in which he talked about everything he had learned in the process. She talked about the nights in the chalet, the lonely walks, the pain of having lost herself. He said that, for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to take responsibility for his own actions. That she was at peace with the fact that he had moved on, and that she expected nothing but mutual respect from then on. At the end of the letter, one sentence stuck with him for a while longer than it should have: "You were the last place I felt whole, and I destroyed that place with my hands." He read and reread the text several times. He thought about responding, but didn't. He folded the letter carefully and put it in the bottom drawer of his desk. Not as a reminder of a love that has ended, but as a symbol of a cycle that has ended. Still, that day, he went out for a walk earlier than usual. The air was cool, and the morning light colored the streets with golden hues that reminded him of Laura reading on the couch in her old house, her feet curled up, her hair tied up awkwardly, a colorful bookmark between her fingers. The memory didn't make him suffer. But it didn't go unnoticed either. Meanwhile, Laura made difficult decisions. He put his apartment up for rent, sold his car, and started giving online literature classes to foreigners. It was what I could do at the moment. Not because of immediate financial need, but because of emotional reconstruction. You wanted to return to teaching in a way that made sense to you. She began attending a support group for women who had been through abusive relationships, not because she considered hers that way, but because she had recognized in herself a tendency to erase herself in front of others. She began, little by little, to recover traces of the woman she once was. Not to win Daniel back, but to regain his own respect, which he had abandoned when he chose the easier, more seductive, more destructive path. In one of these meetings, she was invited to participate in a collective reading about forgiveness and redemption. The topic touched her so deeply that, for the first time in months, she wrote something that wasn't a confession or a request. He wrote a chronicle about choices. He submitted it to a local literary contest without high expectations. When it was selected among the 10 best texts of the year, she felt a hint of pride reappear, shy but real. She then began writing more frequently, not as an outlet but as a way to understand herself. He rediscovered in writing a meaning that had been lost in the years he lived in the shadow of what was expected of an exemplary wife. One weekend, she returned to the city, this time to participate in the competition's prize giving. Daniel found out, by chance, when he read an article in the newspaper. He saw her name, the title of the chronicle, and felt a curiosity that was no longer driven by feeling, but by distant admiration. In the event, he remained away. He watched from afar. Laura took the stage with firm steps, her face serene, and thanked her with a simple speech, in which she spoke about the importance of making mistakes, falling, and getting up with new eyes. He did not mention names. He didn't mention the story itself. But each word carried the weight of what he had experienced. Daniel didn't approach her. I didn't want to. But when he saw her smiling honestly, talking to other authors, understanding her new place in the world, he realized that, perhaps, she was finally finding something he thought lost forever. Later that same night, Laura received a short message. Congratulations on the award. I read your chronicle. You found your voice again. It was Daniel's. She smiled. He didn't respond. He just held the phone against his chest for a few seconds and then turned off the screen. There was nothing more to say. And perhaps, there, the end would finally begin. Or perhaps, the true beginning. In the spring of the following year, Laura was invited to participate in an international literary event. His name was beginning to circulate among publishers, his text about choices had been translated into 2 languages and aroused interest due to its emotional depth. She was thinner, with a calmer look, shorter hair and a way of walking that carried well-healed scars. I still lived alone, in a small apartment, where the essentials were enough. He no longer spoke about the past with regret, but with awareness. He knew that the wounds he carried were part of his story, but they no longer guided his steps. He learned to live with the consequences of his actions without hiding from them. I had accepted, once and for all, that love is not something that can be betrayed and then mended. It's something you respect from the beginning or you lose it forever. On the night of the event, she took the stage as the main speaker, in front of an attentive audience. He spoke firmly about identity, about the risks of being carried away by illusions disguised as desire, about the price of freedom bought with lies. Many were moved. Others identified themselves. Some cried in silence. When she got off the stage, she was approached by a young boy who handed her a book to be signed. He said that, because of a text from her, he had given up on destroying his own marriage. Who learned to talk to his wife? Who listened again? Laura smiled and, for the first time, she was sure that her pain was not in vain. When he got home that night, he opened his email and found an unexpected message. It was from a publisher in France interested in publishing a complete book with chronicles and reflections on his experiences. She responded with a short, decisive yes. It was the end of a cycle, but also the beginning of a path that now belonged to her alone. Meanwhile, Daniel was experiencing an equally transformative moment. The woman he shared his life with, Clara, became pregnant. It was a surprise for both, but received calmly and maturely. It was different now. The love between them was not based on idealized promises, but on reality. There was respect for individual spaces, understanding for the wounds that each person carried and, most importantly, the mutual decision to build something new without the ghosts of the past. When Daniel found out he was going to be a father, he felt a contained joy. It wasn't youthful euphoria, it was silent gratitude for having the chance to form a family on an honest basis. She started preparing the baby's room, reviewing her work routine to have more time at home, learning how to cook dishes that previously she only bought ready-made. It was ready. Not to replace what he lost, but to live something that, at that moment in life, finally made sense. On a rainy day, Laura and Daniel met by chance at a neighborhood market. He was with Clara, pushing the stroller with a small stuffed bear inside. Laura was alone, with a burgundy scarf and a bag of books in her hand. Their eyes met for a few seconds. None of them hesitated. She approached, greeted Clara politely and exchanged 2 light sentences with Daniel. There was serenity in the gesture. And something rare, total absence of resentment. When they said goodbye, Daniel lightly squeezed Laura's arm and said, in a low but firm tone, that he was happy to see her well. She thanked him. He wished happiness with the baby. And they were gone. They didn't look any further. It wasn't even necessary. The cycle that united them was concluded with dignity. And they both knew that, even with all the pain they had experienced, they had emerged from the darkness as better people. Laura continued her literary career and became a reference in chronicles about emotional maturity. She was invited to teach workshops, opened a small cultural space with other writers and, finally, rediscovered the pleasure of teaching, without the constraints of her old life. He never got involved in intense relationships again. He learned to recognize the signs he previously ignored. And, over time, it allowed loneliness to stop being a punishment and become a choice of serenity. Daniel, in turn, watched his daughter's birth with teary eyes and an expanded heart. They called the girl Elisa. And when he held that little being in his arms, he understood that love, when it is true, does not need control or grand gestures. Just presence, truth and delivery. Clara held his hand firmly, and there, in that room lit by restrained smiles, Daniel realized that destiny, although relentless, sometimes offers us a second chance, not to relive the past, but to do things differently in the present. And he knew he wouldn't waste this opportunity. As for the man who had used Laura to get revenge on Daniel, the end was silent and bitter. A lawsuit filed by other victims brought to light a network of manipulations and fraud. His name was exposed in newspapers, and the circle that protected him fell apart. He tried to escape, tried to cover his tracks, but was found in another country living under a false identity. He was extradited and, during the trial, his face appeared on the news, accompanied by headlines reporting the crimes committed. Laura watched the sentence in silence, without hatred, just with the certainty that justice, when it comes, is less about revenge and more about truth. And Daniel, upon learning of the condemnation, did not celebrate. He just closed the newspaper, looked at Clara and Elisa sleeping, and knew that his victory was not another man's ruin. It was the life he was now building, stone by stone, with honesty. And so, each character followed their own path. None of them emerged unscathed. But everyone, in their own way, found some form of redemption or a fresh start. Love was betrayed, yes. But it was not annihilated. It was transformed. And sometimes, that's the best we can hope for. An ending in which no one returns to the starting point, but where everyone learns to walk with more conscious steps. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? What was the part that marked you the most? Leave your comment below and tell us your opinion. Take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of the next stories. And remember, this channel does not support, encourage or romanticize any form of betrayal. Every narrative here is fictional and serves to show how wrong choices can destroy real lives and feelings. Until next time.